Hello everyone, here's a video I've been meaning to do for quite some time now. I had to find some balloons. The topic is specifically about the overwhelmed hospitals from the effects of COVID essentially in the last 2 years and the claim that it overwhelms hospitals and ICU beds. I'd like to point out just some numbers as much as I can to help understand in which way COVID is contributing to hospitals getting overrun. Every country has different statistics. Every country also has different lifestyles, which means that statistics change due to that in every different country. So what I've decided to do is use Canada as an example, and I used death figures from 2019. Quick Google search away to find it. I'm going to use this cup to represent the hospital system in Canada. Now, we can think of it as one hospital, or we can just think of it cumulatively of all the hospitals. I'm going to treat it as all the hospitals in Canada because I'm using numbers for the entire country. And also, I will be averaging a lot of the numbers so that it's just a bit easier to understand. So deaths in Canada have been steadily going up. Canada is about 300,000 deaths per year count right now, right just under actually, and steadily going upward. Out of those 300,000 deaths, about 30% is cancer, right here. So I've just filled the balloon with water, and what I'll do is I'll be filling the hospital with these cancer patients because people who are dying will most likely, especially if they have to be treated through cancer, will be or end up in a hospital. So we have to count them in. Here we go. That's 30% of all hospitals in these years. If you want to think of it that way, we can say 2019, but these years, we can count on this. Scientifically, we can count on it. That's why, well, I guess we prepare for it, right? Out of that, about 20% was heart disease. Now, it would be wise of us to think about underlying causes that bring these different diseases and why we keep track of them. And the question is whether we would be able to societally attend to reducing these. One of the common arguments that I hear is that comparing COVID to heart disease or cancer or any other diseases like this is a false equivalency. And I've realized that false equivalency, it only checks out if you're comparing these diseases in terms of whether they're airborne or not. But when health measures are supposed to be implemented, the mode of transmission is just one of the factors. In fact, one of the biggest factors is the numbers of casualties. That is why people are not afraid to go out and die from getting struck by lightning all the time, because it's statistically known that it rarely happens, but it does happen. Shark attacks equally. So to continue, heart attacks are about 20%. Now, we can start thinking about whether these cancer or heart attack is due to the fact that, well, let's put it this way. Our governments allow for lifestyles and choices that people have in order to get to a point where they're having a heart attack when, they could have had many years ahead of them. One of the good examples that everyone brings is sugar, and there's overconsumption, even meat perhaps, I guess, or this or that or the other. I'm sure the science is in on what causes, by and large, cancers and heart diseases, because we're at the 50% mark right here with how overwhelmed our hospitals are every year. And all of these hospitals and all these workers here attending to these people, they all have jobs and are creating the infrastructure of our society. Now, one could argue that cancer and heart disease just happens and that is just part of life. I would say, yes, that is true. And I would say, yes, it's also true that depending on how a person lives their life and attends to themselves and their body, those statistics can drastically change. The science is in on that as well. If you think I'm wrong, I would love to know about it. Then furthermore, we have common diseases. I just named them that because in the chart that I was looking at, there was diabetes, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, and so forth. They were all in about 2 to 3% of deaths that were accounted for, and there's about 12 of them or something like that, or 10 to 12 of them. And so I said about 25%. I just rounded it up. So these are all the deaths. Now, diabetes is known to be caused by overconsumption of sugar. So if there's no the science in there, then I don't know what diabetes that we can claim. All of these are just something that happens. Other diseases was the last one. And that one, I don't know what they are. These are, I think accidents were also included in the common diseases. So others is about 30%, because I was rounding things off. I just took it all the way down to 20% in order to account for COVID over there. But basically, one of the other diseases would be COVID, obviously. So technically, we're already in the camp of COVID here with whatever else is going on. And this is a pretty large 20% number to actually not know the causes of. It's just a side note. It's actually, look, you can already tell is that 5 times bigger than COVID itself. So to not know what this is while the world's turned upside down over this blob right here is something to think about at the least. So here we are. What's happening here is that we have hospitals that are about to get overwhelmed. They're 95% full already. Now one can claim we can just build more hospitals and just add more buckets, which would be great, actually, if we want to allow people to enjoy their lives and take their chances and, jump off squirrel suits for that matter, which this is those statistics are right in here. And then everyone has to understand that this life of, plenty is just creating a lot of jobs for our health workers here, right? Which is, fair enough, like healthy society, chance-taking free society as well. And as a result, we take care of each other because we pay taxes for it, right? You get helicoptered in Canada if you get stuck in the mountains or fall off a cliff because you were, backcountry skiing, right? And it's a fantastic feature, but, nobody made you go out there into the wilderness. Anyways, finally, we've got our COVID here. So about 35,000 people died from COVID in 2 years since the whole thing started. 300,000 deaths a year. So 35,000 divided by 2, just to look at it annually, is about, say, 15,000 deaths from COVID per year that happen. Out of 300,000, that is, 5%? So 5%, right, of deaths, out of all deaths, is COVID. And what everyone's been wanting to warn the world of is wanting to flatten the curve enough so that all of these deaths don't happen right away. That's what flattened curve means. It means that the virus will come sooner or later, and then, rather than filling the bucket full of water and having it leak over, we can slowly let the whole thing out by locking the societies up, by masking, by doing all sorts of, let's call them creative ideas to deal with it. Now, the main thing that came into the picture was the solution that was proposed, which was the vaccines, which was meant to actually completely take this number out of the picture entirely. Now, let's also make a note that there is research out there, I can link it down below, but you can Google it, it's not hard to find, that about 75 to 85% of these COVID deaths were actually people who were in this previous camp. Those were the people with 3 comorbidities, and those are the 3 things out of this group who technically were already on their way out. Now, everybody has a friend who was superbly healthy and actually died from COVID, and those numbers, and this is on both sides of the aisle, something that's not disputed, those numbers are actually probably like a few drops compared, well, not drops, let's say a little leak. And that leak is the price that the entire world is paying right now. So let's assume that the vaccines actually promise to take this 5% of deaths out of the circulation, of the death circulation, and save the hospitals from overflowing. The reality is that about 50% of hospitals are filled with vaccinated, which there's straight up data for as well, on both sides of the aisle, undisputed. And that half of these people who got vaccinated would fill up the hospitals. And that is what it all is. It's a numbers game. So the claim is that the vaccine will reduce the percentage of the chance of a person ending up in the hospital. So let's say if it wasn't 50% out of here that were vaccinated, it would be 40% that would be not overwhelming the system. Now, we can also make the same claim about diabetes, because diabetes is actually very similar in percentage to COVID. It's just under, it's about 4%. You could say the same thing about diabetes and sugar and say, well, if we didn't allow for a population to consume sugar too much, then we would reduce the percentage of the deaths of diabetes from 50% to 40%, for example. So what has happened is that we have put our entire attention across the whole globe to attend to the 50% of this 5%, so about 2.5% of deaths that are happening, and stop life from being normal, creating a completely new normal over this. And my question to everyone is, why? Why did we do that? Why do we have a bucket full of water and our intention is on half of this? And our intention is on just one product solution. That's another argument, is that if you lose weight, if the nation loses weight, because not everybody knows, but the research is out there. If you know how to read research papers, the research is out there is that people who lose weight will actually also reduce their chances of being in this bubble. Because, and that goes for not smoking, that goes for being healthy in general. And you see what's happening here is that we're talking about health right now, which is how do we find lots of solutions to reduce this number just in general, right? That's what health is about, right? So basically for COVID, there is hundreds of different solutions that we could mandate for. We can tell people, we can make people lose weight, not just that they wouldn't die from heart attack, but just that they wouldn't die of COVID, right? And the mandate seems to be revolved around a very small niche of solutions. In fact, it's all predicated on social isolation and in taking a specific medical product, the vaccine, which is manufactured by many different companies who have a lot of, obviously, stakehold in this. So my final question to everyone is, as we add these casualties, how much out of this percentage of deaths that we get annually should we pay attention to through legislatures, through different mandates? And how much of these deaths should be left for people to decide upon? Because if we're going to make mandates over 5% of less of deaths over COVID, then shouldn't we do the same for the rest? Or if you think of it opposite, if we're not mandating this lifestyle, and this is freedom of choice world, then why are we mandating this? Is the only argument left because it's airborne? Is that the only argument that is left? And if it is, why is that argument of it being airborne taken over the numbers of deaths as a parameter? For Canada, actually, it's good that this bucket didn't overflow, because the whole idea was not to overflow the hospital system. So numbers stayed low. That's for both vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Now, for countries that have let the virus rip, this amount of deaths would probably go from the 5% into half more, like in Sweden, or twice as more, like in the US, or even up to 3 times more, which would be 15%, like is happening in some European countries and other places in the world. Bear in mind that we don't know, or I haven't seen any statistics on whether the deaths that happen in those countries are the deaths from the other camp, or whether it would actually overflow the whole bucket by up to 10% more, which is, I think, the main claim of what's going to happen in the world if we let it rip, which is now in the domain of tracking annual excess deaths. There's a lot of questions to which level that this leak would actually happen, and whether it would be just counted as the deaths that are uncounted for or have been uncounted for up until now. Thanks for watching. I hope this puts a bit of a light into the false equivalency, false narrative, and technically logical fallacy that we should be careful with, because if we allow for mandates to be passed on things that are, when it comes to death, a statistically insignificant, of course every death is devastating, but statistically insignificant number, then we're allowing ourselves to give governments the ability to mandate anything they want that is what the majority of people are not struggling with. And that's a slippery slope world to be in. Please be careful out there with this one. Thank you for listening.